Stories are how we understand our world as humans. Our brains are wired to make meaning through stories. Stories help us process what we learn and retrieve the information later. Think about the most important day of your life so far, or the saddest moment, the happiest moment, or even a time when you were terrified. If you were telling these stories out loud, most likely you'd do some context setting, and then you'd have a build-up and a resolution or reflection. They would be told as stories with complete sentences. Here's what your story wouldn't be. Bullet points. And so if you want to build an effective presentation, a persuasive presentation, you have to be able to tell a story that your audience can follow. To do that, you need to understand the mechanics of stories. The good news is that stories have very predictable structures. And when you use a story-based narrative to build out your slide deck, you'll be able to hold your audience's attention and they'll be able to remember what you say. This is key to decision making. You'll lay things out in a sequence that makes them feel comfortable taking action. That's really what persuasion is. It's engaging your audience both emotionally and intellectually so they can move forward. In fact, there are many new discoveries in neurobiology that prove that using stories boosts oxytocin, that's sometimes called the cuddle hormone, based on the role it plays producing feelings of trust and bonding. Oxytocin helps people remember key points of your presentation, recall them, have an affinity for them, and act on those points. In short, stories make people care. If you've ever heard the saying, emotions sell, logic justifies, this is the science behind that. There are extensive empirical studies that prove that leaders who tell stories are more effective and go further in their careers. So think about that for a minute. If prominent leaders use stories as part of their leadership toolbox, why wouldn't you use stories when presenting and interacting with them? So let's take a look at a classic story you're probably familiar with. Star Wars. Star Wars follows the blueprint of the universal hero's journey made famous by Joseph Campbell. We start with Luke Skywalker, who's living on a farm. He finds a secret message in R2-D2. He initially refuses Obi-Wan when he meets him out in the desert, but when he goes back home and finds that his aunt and uncle are killed, he returns to Obi-Wan and he commits to learning the way of the Force. Then all the good stuff happens. Luke teams up with Han Solo and fights off the enemy in the cantina. They're captured by the Death Star. They find Leia, only to get stuck in a giant trash compactor. Then they survive and begin their escape with Princess Leia. They head to the Rebel base with the enemy in hot pursuit, and then Luke joins the Rebel Alliance and he uses the Force to make an almost impossible shot and destroy the Death Star. And at the end, we see Luke emerge as a hero and acknowledge the power of the Force. He's reborn in a way. So if you look at this closely, the story didn't really begin until Luke met Obi-Wan and crossed the threshold to pursue learning the way of the Force. He initially refused. Why? Because change is hard and people are naturally riddled with doubts and what ifs. We're not wired to fix things we don't perceive to be broken. It's not until we realize that a problem must be solved to advance that we summon the courage to cross the threshold. That's really what you're trying to do in your presentations. Get your hero to cross the threshold so they can learn the way of the Force. So how do you do that? Well, you need to give them a vision of what success looks like on the other side of the threshold. To do that, you need to take them through a little simulation. NASA pilots go through about 300 hours of flight simulations before they ever leave our atmosphere. The simulation helps them get to a comfort level of what would otherwise be very uncomfortable so they can suppress their doubts and what ifs. Your pitch deck is the same thing. It's like a flight simulator for your decision maker. Here's your first assignment. Jot down who the hero of your story is, what their quest is, and what's standing in the way.